Hey everybody, we're going to start the webinar in a couple minutes here. Thanks for coming.
Did you hear that? Okay. Okay, let's just. Okay.
No.
I'm wondering if we just mute it up there.
That's what I did.
Set it here.
I did.
Hey everybody, this is Derek, Lucky Vitamins Category Manager of Vitamins, Minerals, and Herbs. It's great to have so many people joining us today for the Lucky Vitamin Wellness Webinar, Raw Probiotics. Thank you all very much. We're very happy to have Bruce Topping, who is the National Educator for Garden of Life with us today. Bruce has been involved in the alternative medical community his entire life by managing health food stores, speaking for support groups, conducting seminars for Weston A. Price chapters, and being an activist for small and local agriculture. He's a consummate student of natural medicine in all its forms with a passion for helping people understand the controversies of diet and nutritional science. Based on his wealth of knowledge, Bruce is a highly sought-after national speaker for Garden of Life and is a probiotics and enzymes expert. He is currently authoring a book on digestive health and is a popular guest on several radio shows. Before I turn things over to Bruce, just a few quick reminders. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to you after its conclusion. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please enter them into the question box on your screen. At the end of the webinar, we will try to answer as many as possible. The promotion code will be given at the end of the presentation and will be available for 72 hours. Thank you all again, and we're going to turn this over to Bruce now.
All right, guys. This is exciting. I've never done a Lucky Vitamin webinar. This is cool. So a little bit about my background. I'm one of the kids that grew up in this business. My family runs a chain of health food stores. So I was, about 8 years old when I started bagging bulgur wheat and sealing carob powder and taking the untradeable lunch to school. Everybody had Lunchables and Pop-Tarts, and I had carob pods and sesame candies and tofu. So that's my background. I grew up studying natural medicine and really just diving in to see all that we can do for people. And I'll tell you guys, this is my favorite topic, getting into probiotics and the microbiome. If you've never heard that term, I'll be introducing it here. But just getting into how we can heal people and starting in their digestive tract. And one of my favorite products that Garden of Life makes, in fact, one of the reasons I work for Garden of Life is the raw probiotics. So we'll dive right in here. First off, I want people to know that we have a lot of bacteria in our bodies. In fact, a lot of the books out there are saying we're outnumbered 10 to 1, that we're made up of 10 trillion human cells. That's including every liver cell, bone cell, skin cell, brain cell. That's 10 trillion human cells. And then we're made up of about 100 trillion bacterial cells. So when it comes to, a straight up number count of how many cells are in our body, we're actually more bacteria than human. So, if some books actually put a tongue-in-cheek question like, are you more bacteria or are you more human? And lucky for us, bacterial cells are really small, so we're still mostly human. But this area of research has only begun. I mean, really in the last 15 years, we've started looking at what we call now the microbiome. And it refers to a collection of trillions of microbes. We're talking 3 to 5 pounds of bacteria that live in the gut and also in the stomach and on our skin, in our eyes, on our hair. Really, we are awash in bacteria. And I want to talk about what's going on with probiotics. So we'll jump right ahead here if I can get control of this thing. And let me see if I can get that to work. Here we go. So what I want to point out is that about 100 years ago, things looked very different. That it turns out ancient humans did not have refrigeration. And so when we launched this line called Raw Probiotics, we went back to the drawing board. We started with this guy, Eli Metchnikoff. And Metchnikoff is famous. He is one of the guys that put probiotics on the map about 100 years ago. He's one of the fathers of immunology. He won a Nobel Prize back in 1908. But before he won the Nobel Prize, he was looking around Europe and he was doing a huge and famous longevity study. He wanted to know who was living the longest in Europe back in 1905. And it turned out to be the Bulgarian peasants. In fact, Dr. Metchnikoff named a strain that got named Lactobacillus bulgaricus. And it's named after the Bulgarian peasants. And today, that strain of bulgaricus actually is legally required to be found in yogurt in order to be legally called yogurt. So it's a famous strain named after the Bulgarians. And lo and behold, the Bulgarians were living to their mid to late 80s back in 1905. Other countries were dying in their 50s. Most of Western Europe had pretty long history of low life expectancy. Remember that Mozart and Schubert, for instance, died in their 30s. So when he looked at this time, this unique time and space in history where this doctor was cataloging all the different cultures of Europe, he found that the primitives, the groups living in the mountains, in the Caucasus Mountains, they were not eating flour and sugar and tea and crumpets and biscuits and crackers and jams. They didn't have any of those foods. They were eating traditional fermented foods, especially the famous creme bulgare, the Bulgarian yogurts. And they were really more like fermented milk. It was more of a clabbered sour milk than it was a traditional yogurt the way we would see it. But it had a lot of bacteria. And Metchnikoff found that they were eating upwards of 50 billion microorganisms per day. I mean, think about that for a minute, that 100 years ago, these ancient people that were living so long were putting 50 billion probiotic organisms, cells, into their gut. And they weren't doing all the modern things like C-sections and chlorine and refined sugar. It's like, how many birth control pills were being distributed in ancient Bulgaria? How many alcohol and antibiotics and pesticides and bromine and chlorine were in their water supply? It's none, right? I mean, that's what we're up against, is that we're now seeing kind of a double whammy, that our modern biomes, our intestinal ecosystem, is radically shifting. And this depressing list on the screen right now is really a big part of why. C-sections changed the game for a long time. We're now seeing studies where children who are born via cesarean delivery have higher rates of asthma, ear infections, allergies, autoimmune diseases, autism, all kinds of bad stuff. And we're beginning to see that their gut has a lot to do with the formation of their nervous system and their entire immune arsenal. Also chlorine and bromine and fluorine, these are halogens, and they're put into the water supply. They're also put into the flowers. We brominate flowers. These chip away and damage a lot of the good critters and good defensive bacteria in our gut. Of course, refined sugar, we all know about that one. Birth control pills are pretty powerful agents. They can kind of sterilize and chip away at the microbiome too. And then antibiotics, and not just what you took from the doctor, but what's in the environment. There's lots of residues. And if you look at this big list right now, think about how much of this is new. That if you were walking around 100 years ago, or 5,000 years ago, or any time before then, you would not have C-sections and chlorine and birth control pills and pesticides and antibiotics. It just wouldn't exist. And so what's happened is that almost every American, and I would actually say almost every Westerner, is now on the continuum of dysbiosis. And that's a term I want everybody to be familiar with. Dysbiosis is a term that I believe is going to become more commonplace. It's not thrown around a lot right now, today in the health food stores or in the doctor's offices. But it will be, I believe. And dysbiosis really means that we have a shift in our ecosystem. It's where we have more bad critters moving in. You can kind of think of your gut as like the universe's biggest apartment building. And you're the landlord, and you can allow the good renters to move in, or you can allow the bad renters to move in. And if you allow the bad guys to move in, well, they might carry assault rifles and sell drugs in the parking lot, and nobody else is going to want to live there, right? And that's kind of what's happening to a lot of Westerners. We're chipping away the defenses, and we're allowing the opportunists, we're allowing the bad critters to move in and take up residence in our gut. And this changes the game. So dysbiosis is a continuum. It's not like you either have it or you don't. It's really a matter of degree. Some people have it just a little bit. Some people have it really bad. Other people have it so bad it's darn near fatal. So there's lots of different species in our gut. I mean, most people out there have only heard of Acidophilus. They've maybe heard of a few other strains. But truly, inside the gut, there are over 1,000 different species. Many doctors say there's actually over 1,500 species. There's some debate about that. But there's a whole lot of different organisms living in our gut, and many of them have not been well studied. But this is, I would say, the biggest frontier in medicine. And it doesn't matter what field of medicine you practice. If you're a cardiologist, well, there's lots of research now about how the microbiome in your gut affects, cholesterol levels and blood fats and inflammatory markers. Or if you're a psychiatrist working with neurological disease, then you're definitely reading lots of research and studies about how the microbiome affects all kinds of brain health and neurological outcomes. So it's a big field, and I want to talk about how to recognize dysbiosis. I want everybody who's listening to this webinar to be really familiar with what symptoms, what signs, how will you know when somebody has dysbiosis? And the first one would be chronic constipation or frequent diarrhea. A lot of people used to come into my store and they would come up to me and they'd say, well, Bruce, I'm pretty regular. I go every week. And I'd shake my head and say, whoa, that's not good. You need to be moving your bowels every day. Some people really don't understand how important good transit time is. And I'll tell you that some people have alternating diarrhea and constipation, and it can take over their life. It's like where they know where every bathroom is on the way to work or on the way home, and they live their life around, this stress about their bowel movements. What I want people to know is that it's all about the ecology of their bowel. We've thought for a long time it was about fiber. Right? What about fiber? A lot of people to this day, whenever their bowels are sluggish and they're not able to poop very well, they will go to the store and they'll buy bulking laxative fibers such as Metamucil and Bran and Psyllium. And personally, and at Garden of Life, we're not a big fan of that stuff. Bulking laxatives tend to fail. In fact, all the studies, they go back to the 70s. You look at all the studies on fiber, water, and exercise, and we often see that the fibers become obstructed. It's like pressure stuffing a homemade sausage where the fiber balloons up and swells and creates damage and hernias. I really want people to know one of the big discoveries about bowel disease research is that we need to get more bifidobacteria into the people's colon. If we can get more bifidobacter strains in their bowel, then we can kind of orchestrate those nerve and muscle contractions that drive peristalsis. And peristalsis is just a fancy word for the snake-like movement of your intestines that makes your pooper work. And I'm here to tell people, again, it's not about cramming fiber into the bowel, because you can't make up for a lack of good bacteria by simply cramming more fiber in. You've got to improve the ecology. And again, it's all about bifidobacteria. We'll talk about that later. That's one of the first ones people should know. When they have sluggish bowels or cramping or bloating or abdominal pain, they should be thinking about dysbiosis and not just a lack of fiber. Moving on, I also want to talk about the actual surface of the bowel. In our gut, we have these little tendrils called villi. And as the villi become damaged, if you fail to acidify, if you fail to have good bacteria making all the acids to defend you, that's what Acidophilus does, by the way. They make acids. I should back up. Many people may not understand that. One of the key things we have to have in order to be healthy in our body is enough acids. I know it sounds crazy because there's some books out there that say acid is all bad, but those books are wrong. The reality is that acids are profoundly important as a defense. It's that way on your skin, it's that way on your stomach, and it's that way in your colon. The number one most well-known strain is called Acidophilus, which literally means lover of acid. That's how we define Acidophilus. It secretes all kinds of acids. And that's what we need. We need probiotics to secrete a good list of acids and enzymes, and they also produce vitamins and even hormones. And the deal is that if you fail to have good bacteria defending and you allow the opportunists, the bad critters, to move in, then we're no longer going to have the healthy shag carpeting up here that we see. It's going to be more like Berber carpeting, flattened, blunted, crushed, layers of plaque and mucus and biofilm. And this is where customers will come to my store and they'll engage me as a health coach, and they'll tell me, well, I'm allergic to corn and wheat and soy and peanuts and eggs, and basically by the end they'll tell me all they can eat is ostrich and quinoa or some obscure exotic list of foods. And what I want to tell those folks is that it's not about eliminating all those foods out of their diet. It's about trying to restore the integrity of the tight junctions and the mucosal wall. And I want to talk about that, the tight junctions. That sounds real fancy. But really, these are just little doors that hold the intestine together. They were only discovered in the late 80s, so we're still learning a lot about how they work. But basically, these doors, these little tight junctions, these are little protein-based bonds that hold all the cells together. And when the bad critters move in, they physically damage those little doors. And this is what used to be called leaky gut syndrome. Nowadays, they call it intestinal permeability. It means the same thing. But basically what we're seeing now is that once people fail to defend their colon, once they have a lack of good probiotics, then the bad guys move in, like the fungus and the yeast and the Clostridium and the strep and the E. coli and all the bad microbes, and they take up residence and they live on the surface, and they physically damage, they dysregulate the little doors. And now we'll have all these molecules gaining access to your blood and lymph. And that means your immune system will go into a tailspin, building antibodies against every little molecule that it gains access to your blood. Your blood can't digest anything. The only thing that can happen once it's in your blood is that your immune system will go very erratic and try to go after everything. So we're now seeing maybe the biggest discovery in the last 30 years of immunology has been the role that dysbiosis and leaky tight junctions are an absolute precondition to developing any autoimmune disease. Let me be clear. Every autoimmune disease that has ever been studied, and the most common one is Hashimoto's, but there's many others, we're now finding that every single one of those people, if they go to a clinic and they actually test their intestines, if they run a lactulose mannitol challenge and they actually look at their tight junctions, every single one of them has leaky tight junctions. I'm not saying that, if you develop a leaky gut, you will always get an autoimmune disease. That depends on genetics. That depends on a lot of stuff. But everybody with an autoimmune disease already has leaky tight junctions. It's 100% correlated so far. So I want to say to you, it makes sense when you consider that most of the immune antibody generating cells, what we call lymphocytes, the B cells, the T cells, the natural killer cells, these all hang out in the gut. They reside in this big lymphoid collection. We have a huge amount of lymph in our gut. And it turns out that our immune system is really housed there. So when we start damaging the intestinal surface and we allow all these molecules out, boy, it sends our lymphocytes and our antibody-generating machinery into a complete tailspin. And I believe this has a lot to do with the modern inflammatory syndromes like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, dementia, all the huge inflammatory syndromes that are killing most Westerners by far. So I also want to talk about acid reflux. One mention here is that the gut biome, our microbiomes in our intestine, has a lot to do with our thyroid. Literally, about 20% of thyroid hormones are activated in the gut by the microbiome. And if you have a sluggish thyroid, one thing that happens is that you'll have low acid secretion. You'll actually have a very low acid. The other thing that can happen is that people have, a growth of a bacteria in the stomach called H. pylori. Officially, that's actually the most common infection in the world. And H. pylori shuts down stomach acid. Low thyroid will also shut down stomach acid. And when you have low acid, there's some interesting things that happen. One of the main things is that you'll develop reflux. Sounds counterintuitive. And if you look at the drugs like Prilosec, they're on television presenting the idea that acid reflux is caused by low acid. It's a very common idea, and everybody believes that. But if you look at the literature, the studies show it to be almost the opposite, that about 9 out of 10 people who have acid reflux symptoms actually have low acid. And how can that be? So there's 2 things that make this clear. Number 1, acid is the trigger to open the valves and drain the stomach and release the bile and release the bicarbonates and release the enzymes. In other words, acid is a trigger. If you have low acid, the whole digestive machine grinds to a crawl, and you'll have a lot less function. Basically, food will sit there a lot longer. The whole process will grind to a crawl, and it will run much slower. That's number 1 thing you should know about acid. It's the trigger to activate the digestive symphony. Number 2 thing you should know about acid is that acid prevents the growth of fungus and biofilms and protozoa and H. pylori and many other microbes. So number 1, acid activates digestion. Number 2, acid prevents the growth of other microbes. So what happens when people have low acid? Well, number 1, they'll have a rapid growth of fungus in their stomach, all kinds of fungal films and spores. And number 2, they'll have very sluggish and slow drainage. The food won't drain very quickly. It doesn't have enough acid. So what happens to starches or sugars that sit at about 95 degrees for hours with lots of fungal spores? Well, they're going to ferment. It's actually very much like making bread. Have you ever done that before? You add some sugar to yeasty dough and watch the gas and foam rise. And that's what's going on. Millions of Americans actually have a little fermentation vat going on in their stomach that is pushing upward gases into their throat. And usually it's not erosive. They won't even feel it. Most people who have acid reflux don't know that they have acid reflux because they've never experienced heartburn. The number 1 symptom is throat clearing and burping. When you run into people that are doing that chronic, and they're constantly clearing their throat and they have that mucousy frog in their throat, often that's because the fermentation gases have damaged the trachea and the swallowing tube, in the throat. And the throat's only defense is to pump out mucus to defend you. And over time, you'll be breathing in enough of that hydrochloride to damage the lungs. And this is why people with acid reflux actually have lots of lung problems and asthma and, COPD even. So we really have to look at acid reflux as a red flag. It's a huge factor. And to me, it means you've damaged the absorptive surface, you've damaged the immune arsenal, you've hurt your ability to absorb protein and minerals, and you've set the stage for chronic disease. I mean, it's a serious matter. I also want to talk about skin pathologies. Most of them, eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, most of these are autoimmune diseases. So there's already a huge connection in the literature that when we look at skin problems, they are very much linked to gut issues. So I just want people to know that, I'm not saying that MSM and omega-3 and all the nutrients for skin are bad. They're good. They really help people. But I think we need to begin the healing journey in their digestive tract and try to shift their ecosystem. It's really going to help their skin. And finally, the gut-brain axis. This is the white-hot tip of the spear right now in the research community. There's a lot of interest in these vagal nerves. In fact, it's the longest nerve in the body. It's called the vagus nerve. It's named after the Latin word for wandering, which is vagus. And it comes out of the brainstem, and it wanders down, and it connects the gut to the liver, to the bowel, to the lungs, to the kidneys, to the spleen, to the adrenals. And basically, these vagal nerves transmit lots of information from the gut to the brain. And we're beginning to see that people with neurological disorders like anxiety, depression, autism, ADHD, all kinds, we're beginning to find that their vagal nerves and their microbiome look very different from healthy people. So this is a huge frontier of research, and all of this is why Garden of Life is a digestive health company. We take the whole condition of dysbiosis and the whole idea of the microbiome, we take that very seriously. And so we have launched a product called Raw Probiotics. It's actually a line of probiotics that are what I would call practitioner level, meaning that they have really high cell counts that are guaranteed. They have big strain diversity. They have no binders and fillers, and they're shipped cold. So let's kind of run through what makes these so good. I mean, number 1, they are made out of food. When we look at what composes raw probiotics, there's really three things. There's the Bulgarian yogurt, kind of a throwback to Dr. Mechnikov. We wanted to include a Bulgarian yogurt concentrate. Number two, a kefir SCOBY, or a kefir grain. This is unique to Garden of Life. I've never seen any other company doing this, and it's expensive. But we grind up the actual colonies, the little SCOBYs. It's a symbiotic colony. Some people call it a grain. It actually is not a grain. There's nothing to do with wheat or barley. But it's kind of like it's like the little floaty thing in the bottom of kombucha. I mean, that's a different colony, but that's the colony from kombucha. We're getting the actual colony from kefir, which looks like a blob of cauliflower. It's kind of gross looking, honestly. But we grind it up, and we put it in there because it has lots of neat compounds. It has lots of good acids and enzymes and bacteriocins and polysaccharides. And I mean, it is really a whole food. Think in your mind that when humans eat cultured food, are they getting just a pile of bacteria? That when you eat sauerkraut, it's nothing but bacterial cells in just one big heap? Of course not, right? I mean, food is going to have many proteins and minerals and enzymes and acids, and that's what we were shooting for with raw probiotics. It's not just the new school approach of isolating and centrifuging bacteria into a pill. We wanted a whole food. So the first two are foods, and the third approach is kind of the modern pharmacologic approach of probiotics, where we study them in labs and we isolate them and refine them. And so we kind of wanted the old school approach with the yogurt and the kefir with the new school studied strains. So it's kind of bridging the gap and trying to really give people the benefit of cultured food. That's the whole idea with raw probiotics. We know that many Americans, and really most Westerners, are not making authentic, homemade, cultured food. And we know that the store-bought versions, I mean, let's be real, the store-bought versions are a watered-down Mickey Mouse industrial version of what has been made for hundreds of years. I mean, when you buy yogurt, you'll notice that they use very few strains. They actually add thickeners because they don't want to let it ferment very long. It's usually trucked and shipped for over 2 weeks. It's just not going to have near the benefit of traditional or homemade fermented foods. And that's what Garden of Life is trying to do with this launch. The raw probiotics is all about giving people the benefits of cultured food. And I want to talk about how we ship this. We only ship on Monday or Tuesday. We don't ship on Thursday or Friday because then it's going to sit in the UPS warehouse. And if you've ever been to a UPS or a FedEx warehouse on the weekend, well, it's not air conditioned. It's not humidity controlled. I mean, those trucks can get up to 130 degrees. So we go the extra mile. We do this the way a clinic or a lab would do it. When we're blending the powders, they're always kept under 30% humidity, always under 40 degrees Fahrenheit. We transport them in frozen trucks. We expedite the shipping. We only ship Monday or Tuesday. We ship in coolers. And we only ship second-day air. We are going to make darn sure that these probiotics are still alive when they're on the shelf. A lot of companies don't do this kind of homework. I think it's a shame. So we have launched 2 separate lines of raw probiotics. We have the originals. Let me back up to those, and you can see them. These are just age and gender specific for men and women. And I would count these as the best value in the industry. If you do a metric by CFU count per dollar, these are under 2 cents per billion. And I want to let you know the 85 billion that's claimed on the label here is actually guaranteed through expiration. It's not one of those old style of, at the time of manufacture. A lot of companies used to do that, where they would actually just put a claim for how many cells were there when they first manufactured the product, but they would actually fail to tell you how many were there at the very end, and they wouldn't do the testing and the homework. So these are our original daily ones, just for anybody who's wanting a great amount of cultured food and get a lot of good bacteria back into their gut. And then we make these special care line, and I want to spend a little time on the care line before we end this thing. These are really special formulas. So first off, colon care. This one's in a green box, so think green light, go. This one is meant to make the bowels move more effortlessly and comfortably. A lot of people could really benefit from this. Again, it's very heavy in the bifidobacteria, so you'll see on the list it's about colon transit time. And as I mentioned before, bifidobacter strains are the key. It's about the bifidobacteria. Those strains are turning out to be the best hope for people with chronic and long-term slow transit time, or what you might call constipation. So, slow transit time is a big deal. There's lots of studies that people who have sluggish transit time, if they're not having effortless, comfortable bowel movements, we see that it affects their, first off, it can affect their bowels, we know that, but it can also affect their brain and their nervous system. We see higher cancer rates, we see higher accumulation of toxins, we see higher inflammation in their blood. I mean, we really must make the bowels move. If the sewer system backs up, it's not going to be a good day. So if you look at the label, I want to point out this colon care has some special strains. The first 3 strains that are in here are labeled with safe deposit numbers. So it'll be like Lactobacillus acidophilus and then SD5221. And I know that most of you are looking at that like, what does that mean? SD5221, that's gobbledygook, right? What we're referring to is a special strain within that species. Remember that acidophilus is an entire species. And, it's kind of like comparing dogs. All dogs are in the same species. So here on the left, you have Canis domesticus. And on the right, you have Canis domesticus, right? They're the same. So if you're just saying Canis domesticus, that's really vague. And it's kind of like saying Lactobacillus acidophilus. There's many different acidophilus. You can have, here's one on the left. This is in the strain or breed called Irish Wolfhound, and he's really big. And on the right, you have a strain called Teacup Poodle, and he's in a teacup. I mean, I think you get the point that you can recruit different species, and then within that species, specialized strains. We want the big, Irish Wolfhound strains of acidophilus, not the Teacup Poodle acidophilus. So it's really about selecting the strain. So we're looking at the colon transit time, and here was a study. I'm simplifying it. I'm not going to show you all the boring charts and graphs. But this was looking at a 14-day trial that 2 weeks we're able to take people who are going about once a week and get them to go every day. And we're using the same dose that is studied. So we're trying to select strains that have a good track record of human trials, and they've been studied for things like gurgling, abdominal pain, constipation, irregularity. And we looked at how they're dose dependent, a high dose and a low dose and a placebo. And we're seeing that these strains are really well documented. In fact, this one here is one of my favorite strains. It's the most studied acidophilus in the history of the world. There's over 100 publications in the scientific journal, so it's been really well described and studied. And we love this one because it works so well for pain. I would highly recommend this formula called Colon Care for people who have lots of abdominal pain or IBS symptoms. We've learned that IBS is really a condition between the gut and the brain. It's not a mechanical problem. It's a signaling problem. It's really where the endorphin machinery is sort of broken. And we need to activate those opioid receptors and turn down the volume on the pain signals. It's a really interesting area of research. And I wish I had an hour just to talk about all the new stuff about IBS. But I'll tell you that this formula called Colon Care is specifically designed for people with abdominal pain, cramping, irregularity, difficulty moving their bowels, and just people who are really gassy. It's called Colon Care, and again, think about the green box, meaning green light, go. Move those bowels. Next up is called Vaginal Care. This one's a pink box, and it's really all about urogenital infections, specifically urinary tract infections. It has a lot of strains. In fact, this one has 38 different strains. And it also contains a very special yeast-digesting enzyme blend. So it's designed to kill yeast and fungus and certain bad bacteria like E. coli. And it actually contains a special blend of enzymes that help break down the spore membranes. Because these yeasts, fungus and yeast can be tough to kill. The biofilms and the actual cell wall of the spores are made of these really tough fibrous types of almost like shellfish fibers. And so we want to put special enzymes that actually break them down. We've recruited a lot of special bacteria and some special enzymes together. So the bacteria, what they do, number one, they make a lot of acids. That's important. But number two, they secrete antibiotic compounds. One's called bacteriocins, peroxides. There's a whole list of different molecules that these bacteria secrete, and that's why they were selected for this formula. These are kind of the army tanks of the antimicrobial world of probiotics. And then the enzymes. So we put lysozymes to actually break down the spores. It's a really tough, aggressive way to kill candida and kill off many fungus. And this would be for people who are craving alcohol and sugar, people who have thrush on the tongue, people who have athlete's foot or toenail fungus, people who are just dealing with fungal infections on a chronic basis. So, men can take this too. Obviously, not a lot of men will buy it because it's in a pink box and has the word vaginal care on it. But it is actually great for men, and there's no hormonal effects. Men often deal with fungal overgrowth too. So it's a great one for both men and women, but we market it for women because that's who all the studies are done on. Moving on to the last two, we have two products that use the same blend. One is called Ultimate Care, and one is called Max Care. I'm going to move through these quick because I don't want to take all our time today. Max Care and Ultimate Care are actually the same blend. One is in a capsule. That's called Ultimate Care here on your screen. And the other one is called Max Care. It's a powder. And these are designed specifically for after you've been on antibiotics. Specifically, we actually designed it for azithromycin, Z-Pak. Z-Pak is the best-selling antibiotic in the world. And so we wanted to have an answer for all the people who come into health food stores who really have lots of damage to their bowel. So I want to talk about these formulas and how they work. So first off, these are designed for what we would call co-therapy. Co-therapy is a word that describes when you're on antibiotics and probiotics together. This used to be a controversy. Some doctors would say not to do this. But now the studies are clear. There's been stacks of studies on this, and we now know that taking probiotics while you're on antibiotics will not reduce the effectiveness of the antibiotic. It will still kill the infection just as well as it ever would have. But you will really hold down the fort and prevent diarrhea and C. diff and all these other horrible outcomes. I mean, going on antibiotics is turning out to be more serious than people thought. These changes can last a long time, that people will go on a broad spectrum antibiotic, and then more than 6 months later, sometimes over a year later, they will be tested again, and they'll find that their bowel is still very much changed and damaged from the antibiotic. This can persist for years. So it's really important for people to start repopulating and restoring the good members of their microbiome back into their colon after antibiotics, and that's what this one is specifically designed for. So we have a lot of research on antibiotic-associated diarrhea. We know that a lot of people who go on antibiotics get diarrhea. We want to prevent that. We also know that in the studies, a lot of people took it right alongside the antibiotic. They were not told when to take it. We would recommend that you separate the dose, that you take your antibiotic at least 2 hours apart from your probiotic. But in these studies, the people weren't told that. And often they would take the probiotic in the same mouthful of water as the antibiotic, and it would still be effective, very effective. So that's what this blend is about. Really excellent research that minimizes all the disruption to the bowel after any type of medication or cleanse. Remember that a lot of people go on oregano oil or black walnut or herbal antibiotics, and those are wonderful, but they can also be damaging to the colon if you stay on them too long. So this would be great after a cleanse or after medications when you want to repopulate the bowel. And then finally, Max Care is the same blend in a powder, and it is 400 billion in a single serving. It is actually the strongest probiotic that you can buy today on the market. And it is, it's like DEFCON 5. It is only 5 servings. So it's really meant to get a lot done in 1 week. You take 1 scoop. I recommend with meals. That's a general recommendation for probiotics. We'll get into the Q&A session here, some common questions. But I would recommend taking this with food. And what makes it a powder partly is that it has a whole bunch of inulin in it. And inulin is made from Jerusalem artichokes. There's a picture of some artichokes. And it's a special extract of the prebiotic fibers. And prebiotics are fuel for probiotics. So probiotics are the living cells. Prebiotics are the fibers and starches which they eat selectively. And when you say prebiotic, it generally indicates some selectivity, meaning it doesn't feed yeast and fungus and blastocystis and protozoa and all the bad critters. It feeds bacteria more specifically. And that's what prebiotics are. Now the capsule version, back to that one, Raw Probiotics Ultimate Care has no prebiotics. Some people are sensitive to prebiotics and gives them gas. Most people really do very well on prebiotics, however, and if you want prebiotics, I would go Max Care. So Max Care has quite a bit. That's why the scoop is so big, and it is an organic inulin derived from, again, Jerusalem artichokes. And that really, also tastes good because we add banana powder to it. So it's not, it's not hard to take. It's very easy to put in water and drink it. It doesn't have an awful taste. And the banana powder actually has some special flavonoids that are good for the stomach wall. We have seen some studies on these certain flavonoids in bananas. So it's a combination of formulas that you're seeing here. So on the bottom you have the regular age and gender specific daily formulas. These are just meant for anybody wanting to get more probiotics into their body every single day. On the top, we have the care line, which are specific for conditions. And again, if you have colon problems, I would go with the green box called Colon Care. If you're dealing with fungal infection or urogenital infections, I would go the Raw Probiotics Vaginal Care. And it's safe for men too. And then finally, if you're trying to repopulate your colon after medications or cleansing, I would use the Raw Probiotics Ultimate Care, or maybe even the Max Care if it was a really aggressive and broad spectrum antibiotic. We also, I didn't mention this, we make the kids formula. That one is completely dairy-free. A lot of kids, especially if they're trying to test for allergies, they don't want any dairy in them. So unlike the rest of these, all the rest of them have dairy in them, except for the Raw Probiotics for kids. The kids formula has no dairy, and it's a very potent blend for children, even down to 3 months of age on the label. So it's a great one for kids. It actually features a special strain for airway disorders and breathing problems and allergies. It's been studied in children. So at the end of the day, guys, we are all about trying to give you practitioner-level formulas, high cell counts that are guaranteed through their entire expiration date, that have big strain diversity, not just 1 or 2 strains, but over 30. We also have no binders and fillers. There's no industrial processing, no synthetic polymers, no acrylic acid spray dry, which is why they're called raw. And then we ship cold to the store. I mean, there are just not many probiotics in the market that do all of this way. I urge you to try them. And as far as how to take them, I recommend with meals. There's been a debate about that for some time, but I think that the better side of the research is suggesting that they should be taken during meals or even right after a meal may be the optimal time. That has to do with that you're draining all the food into your intestines, and there's lots of fuel for the bacteria to eat from your food. They eat when we eat. So guys, I urge you to try probiotics. They can really make a huge difference, especially when you get a really potent formulation like this. Remember that a lot of them that have been out there in the past are literally a 10th or a 50th of this potency. I see a lot of them on the shelf that you have to take the whole bottle to literally get what we have in one pill. There's a big difference out there between brands, and this is why I work for Garden of Life. We are a digestive health company. Thank you, guys. We'll turn it over for some questions now.
Great, thank you, Bruce. Let's see here. Let's start with the first question. And again, Bruce, if you want to reference any of your slides, you feel free to, because some of these may have been touched on already. One customer is asking, what exactly is meant by raw, and how does that relate to how Garden of Life's probiotics are processed?
That's a great question. So what we mean by the word raw is that it's free of industrial processing. A lot of probiotics, they use things like titanium dioxide. They'll use acrylic acid to actually spray dry it. They'll use cellulose polymers like hydroxypropylmethylcellulose. They'll use a lot of things that are kind of like additives. They're meant to be like hamburger helper. It saves the company money, and they have more volume of powder once they chop in all the additives and processing aids. It also helps them make it more uniform in a cheap way, so each capsule is standardized to the same potency. I mean, of course, ours are standardized too. We just do it in a more sophisticated way rather than blending it up with potato starch or silica or cellulose or titanium dioxide. So the fact that we don't use anything that's been heated above 115 degrees is really, and we don't use any solvents, there's no bleaching, there's no pasteurization, we really do a lot of work on making sure that the ingredients have their integrity, and that's what the word raw is.
Great, thank you. We had one customer ask, which is the best product to assist with reflux?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, any of them will help with reflux, but I might suggest either the vaginal care, because a lot of times it's fungal issues. Sometimes I have seen the ultimate care work very well for people, so I would urge either of those two, vaginal care or ultimate care. But reflux is multifactorial, so I don't want to say that it's like you just take a probiotic and it goes away every time. I mean, I would recommend some digestive enzymes. You know, digestive enzymes work really well with probiotics. And enzymes are kind of like chemical scissors. They break apart all the proteins and sugars and carbohydrates and fatty acids and allow them to drain more quickly. And they also make sure that they don't kind of hang around in the gut feeding bad bacteria or decaying and sort of putrefying in their own right. So it's really important that we break everything down really efficiently. So the ultimate would be to take enzymes with your meals and take probiotics right at the end of meals. That, I think, would be the best. So try raw enzymes and raw probiotics together. I think they'd get even more benefits for reflux.
Great, thank you. We have a couple people asking sort of the same question, and it is it possible to take too many probiotics?
That's a great question. So I've actually kind of poured through the toxicology literature. I was looking for a lethal dose that they established with animals, and there has never been one established. I mean, it's interesting. They have given like elephant dosages to mice, and what happens is that the mice have a lot of bowel movements, but they never die, and they never show them to have like organ damage or organ failure. I think the reality is it becomes a waste of money. Like if you sat down and ate like 50 trillion cells in like a bowl, you know, a lot of them would be competing for fuel in the gut, and then since they wouldn't have any real estate or fuel, you would end up just pooping them out. And that wouldn't hurt you, except it would be a waste of money in your pocketbook. So I think that the dosages can go quite high before that happens. I think taking 1 trillion a day can be a good idea in certain scenarios. Not for every person would need that, but I think that it varies a lot what people can handle in terms of where they will get benefits or where the threshold is of waste and ineffectiveness. So I think in general there's really no lethal dose. I've taken a whole bottle of Ultimate Care in a single day before when I was sick. It works quite well to stimulate your immune system at those incredibly high dosages. I've seen studies on over 3,000 billion per day in humans. So, I mean, there's incredibly high dosage ranges out there that have been studied. And in general, I don't see any real adverse events. It's just a waste of money.
Okay. So you had mentioned that the kids formula is dairy-free. So would you also recommend that to an adult with dairy intolerances?
Yeah, they'd have to be. Let me talk about the dairy issue. You know, most of these formulas, other than the kids one, all the formulas have dairy. But the amount of dairy that's in there, for number one, is under 1 gram. Number two, it's already been pre-digested. Most of the casein and gluten has been fully cleaved into peptides and monosaccharides. And then furthermore, we actually put a dairy digestive enzyme blend into each formula. So, I mean, most people who have, you know, gas and bloating or diarrhea when they drink milk or yogurt or ice cream or cheese, they can still handle this. I mean, actually, we have a lot of our own employees at the company who don't eat dairy and can't digest it, but yet when they take this formula every day, they actually become a little more tolerant to dairy. Not that they're going to go eating cheese and milk and all that, you know, all willy-nilly, but it allows them to have a little less symptoms whenever they do encounter dairy. And we actually have some studies on that. Some of these strains can actually make you more tolerant to dairy. Now, with that being said, if somebody comes into the store and they have like an anaphylactic reaction where their throat swells if they touch dairy, I'm not going to sell them raw probiotics. I'm going to have them move on or buy the, you know, raw probiotics for kids. But that formula is really more meant for developing intestines. So I might recommend our Primal Defense for somebody who has like a serious dairy issue.
Okay. So how many of these probiotics are actually surviving the stomach acid and making it where they need to go?
It's a great question. So there's a lot of myths surrounding that question. There's been this theory about enteric coating, as if all the acid-secreting bacteria are going to die if they touch acid, which is really nonsense, first off. I mean, most of these bacteria can actually handle a pretty good molarity of acid, pretty high concentration of acid before they actually will be, you know, destroyed. Now, the reality is most Americans who are buying probiotics actually have low acid to begin with. I mean, I think that any good company, and it's not just us, honestly, any really serious digestive health company who focuses on probiotics will do acid and bile tolerance challenges, meaning they will they will test their strains to make sure they can survive through acid and bile. So in terms of like a number that could be given, like a sweeping generalization about how many of the bacteria will survive into the colon, I don't think you could ever make a number. It's going to be wildly variable from person to person and strain to strain. I will say that we did a lot of work on making sure these strains make it to the colon. In fact, some of the studies, they did fecal recovery where they can still find them active in the poop. So yeah, they made it all the way. I think in general, the whole idea of coating the bacteria to me is sort of marketing. I mean, the new evidence is showing that we probably want bacteria in our stomach, especially the lower stomach. It's called the pyloric antrum, and it doesn't even make acid. There's no parietal cells in the antrum. And it turns out those humans who had more lacto counts in their antrum had less H. pylori and less stomach infections. So it may turn out that we actually want some of the bacteria to contact our stomach. So we don't coat them, and we don't make any claims like only 5% will die or only 2% will die. I think, though, that by far that's probably what you're going to see. Most Americans, especially considering that they have hypochlorohydria and low acid secretion to begin with, I imagine more than 85 to 90% of the cells will reach the colon intact.
All right, thank you. We have time for one more question. Unfortunately, we are starting to run out of time. I would love to keep Bruce on the line and see how many more times I could get him to say poop, but we're going to ask him one more question. So do you recommend taking a probiotic every day indefinitely, or is there any advantage to cycling on and off of probiotics?
Yeah, I like to take it every day. I mean, I consider it that unless you're eating cultured food or eating lots of prebiotics in your diet, the way ancient humans did, then you better be re-inoculating your bowel because, the modern environment is different than it ever has been. There's no human being who ever walked the earth before us who had all these modern assaults chipping away at our biomes from the day we were born on. So I think that modern humans, it kind of behooves us to either eat cultured food on a regular basis, the way our ancestors did, or eat lots of prebiotics to feed the biome that already exists in our colon. And the problem is modern Westerners aren't doing those things. And so, yeah, I'm a firm believer that taking them every day can really offer major benefits. And I'm also of the opinion that I like to find a great mix that works really well for me and stick with it. I'm not one of these people that tries every probiotic in the world. I did that for years, and honestly, I find better results when I just stick with a really good blend and that works well with my body, and I take it every day.
Okay. Well, we're going to wrap this up now. Thanks to all of our Lucky Vitamin customers, and a big thank you to Bruce for all of his information and for taking time out of his very busy schedule to do this webinar and answer all the questions that we've had. Customers, if you haven't done so already, please register for our upcoming webinar on Wednesday, June 24th, hosted by our very own Dr. Jeremy Wolf. For more information, please visit LuckyVitamin.com and search the keyword webinar. Please see the screen right now for the exclusive promo code. Remember, this code is active now and will be active for the next 72 hours on all Garden of Life raw probiotics. We offer free cold pack service on these products. Remember to choose an expedited shipping method so your raw probiotics arrive alive. Thanks again and have a great day.